Hello, everyone, and welcome to this third session of the Joomla Shack conference on our second day. We really appreciate having you guys here. My name is Steve Burge, and I'm going to be your host for this conference. And I'm delighted to welcome Olivier to talk to you today. He is a JavaScript expert living in Brooklyn, New York, and he's going to be explaining why he recommends using jQuery or pure JavaScript, depending on the situation. Olivier, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone. Before anything, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am a French-born web developer. I studied at DePaul University, majored in computer science and computer graphics. And I moved to the Java world for work at the time of the internet bubble. But I created a website as a hobby on the side. I really fell in love with Joomla, used it for many sites, and decided to create my own company in 2011. My goal being to help clients take control of their content, and Joomla is a great tool for that purpose. In creating websites, I started building my own extensions, designed my own templates, and made most of them available to the community. You can find many of those extensions in the Joomla extension directory. My first and most popular one has been jQuery Easy, a tool that helps fix JavaScript conflicts. A new major release is coming up, and I'm actually very excited about it. So you can find other extensions such as a contact directory maker. All these extensions are built on the existing Joomla core extensions and extend the functionality of Joomla. They don't actually are extensions that add tables or anything like this. They are using the core extensions. I encourage you to go take a look on my website. I'm also one of the organizers of the Joomla users groups I do participate in joint events led by the Joomla users group of New Jersey also. But the main topic today is going to try to answer a question that is being discussed a lot on the internet. Should I get rid of jQuery and use pure JavaScript instead? Can I or should I do that now? Is jQuery dead? In trying to answer that question, let's go back in time and do a little bit of history. JavaScript was released by Netscape back in 1995. Its primary purpose was to help Java applets interact with the browser. It also added interactivity, animations, allowing items to be moved around on the page. As some may remember, pages were very static at the time and of the infancy of the web. Netscape was rapidly followed by Microsoft with JavaScript, their own proprietary version of JavaScript. Innovation was key in those days to attract customers and get market shares. Nevertheless, the players decided on writing a common JavaScript language, ECMAScript. In 1999, ECMAScript Edition 3 was released with major additions to the language. It added regular expressions, try and catch blocks. And by 2005, JavaScript became increasingly complex, in part due to a new technique, ajax, asynchronous JavaScript in XML. It was opening doors for app-like functionality. At the time, we used to call it the Web 2.0. To put it into perspective, this is about the time Babble forked into a new product called Joomla in late September. jQuery was officially announced in January of 2006 in New York. By that time, browsers were offering slightly different ways of doing the same thing in JavaScript. You had to write different code for different browsers. It really was a headache with incompatibilities and undocumented bugs. jQuery promised we could write code once and make it work in all browsers. jQuery was not the only player. So for instance, in 2007, MooTools was created to implement features that we knew were coming down the road, but were not implemented yet into the browsers. It was an extension to JavaScript with language constructs that did not exist at the time, like classes. Therefore, it was no surprise that when Joomla 1.5 came along in 2008, it was packaged with one of those libraries. The developer community opted for MooTools, although jQuery was already very strong at the time. MooTools added interactivity to the interface and became an integrated part of the CMS. At some point, 56% of all sites running MooTools were Joomla sites. In 2009, the fifth edition of ECMAScript was released, adding support for JSON, which is a JavaScript object notation used with Ajax. It added strict mode and to avoid errors. 2012 came Joomla 3. Joomla 3 came packaged with jQuery and Bootstrap. At the time, jQuery was used by half the top 100,000 websites. But adding jQuery and Bootstrap improved the user interface of Joomla even more. It still became packaged with MooTools for backward compatibility, and it is the transition to going to jQuery for developers. In 2015, the sixth edition of ECMAScript was released, ECMAScript 2015. It added more features to the language with new syntax, class declarations, function expressions, new keywords such as let and const, and other concepts like promises. So it was already 4 years ago. So there's been a new release of JavaScript now every year ever since in June. Today, we have at our disposal many more things we can play with now. The standards matured. All browser support is barely necessary, and there is wide support in the browsers. So what are the advantages and disadvantages in using jQuery? One thing is that jQuery is written in JavaScript, but it's not quite the same as JavaScript. It's not built in natively into the browser. You need to upload an additional library, and conflicts may occur if some other elements on your web page use another library, for instance. On mobile devices, jQuery becomes too heavy and too slow. You have jQuery mobile, but it's also make it slow. And slowly, the library became overused over the years, and now is used even for simple tasks. We really became dependent on jQuery. We can use JavaScript today to write fast solutions just because the language is understood by the browser without any additional library or tool. The code is clean and efficient. We will see a few examples of that. And getting into pure JavaScript will also help you write better jQuery code, because even though you can write small and readable jQuery code, the underlying engine may be slow with lots of looping and comparing. So it's good to understand what's going on behind the scenes. But before going any further, I want to make a point. It may sound simple and daunting to a lot of you, but I find it good to remind myself this. When developing code we need to ensure we separate HTML, CSS, and JavaScript so that when JavaScript fails, we still have a site that is usable and shows content. And JavaScript can fail different ways, not only because of errors, but also because visitors can decide to turn it off. These concepts have been forgotten in jQuery, where too often we rely on it and to do everything. When we want to create elements, we want to modify styles, all through it. So use HTML to deal with the structure and the content, at the buttons, at the links. Use CSS for the visuals, the interactivity, and the layouts. Yes, now you can animate CSS. You can animate with CSS. You don't have to use JavaScript for that anymore. You can do layouts with media queries, for instance. And then use JavaScript for extra functions like loading additional content with Ajax, add event listeners for touch, clicks, and scroll. So let's look at a few examples on how to modify your code and to use pure JavaScript rather than jQuery. Let's start with this syntax that many know probably already. You probably come across this one. It's used in Joomla a lot, but there are slightly different versions of this. The purpose here is to ensure that anything you place into that block of code is that what you place into it will be executed after the document has been fully loaded. Now you can, in pure JavaScript, you can do pretty much the same thing. You just add an event listener and you get the event DOM content loaded, and you do the code you want to place after everything has been loaded in the document. There are also slightly different ways of doing this, depending on browser compatibility, and depending on some developers preferring an event rather than another one. And it also depends if you just want to have the HTML loaded and not JavaScript, for example. For instance, yeah, there's ways of getting to that. The way you select elements in jQuery is to use the $sign. And if you are in compatibility mode, you use jQuery instead of the $sign. The $sign was actually a syntax that was introduced by the prototype library before jQuery, and it has been pretty much something that has been used throughout the libraries. What you can do in pure JavaScript is use the query selector function. So you tell the document query selector tile. Here you will get the first instance of the first element that has the class tile. Query selector all, you get all elements that have a class tile. And if you want just to reach one element that has an ID, a specific ID, for my tiles, for example, you just get element by ID, and that's a syntax that has been in pretty much from the beginning. Once you selected an element, what you can do with it in jQuery, for example, if you want to hide an element or a set of elements, you just call and hide. So in order to select an element and do something with it, here you can do in pure JavaScript a query selector all, which is going to get all the elements that have the class tile, and then you loop on it, and you do a for each loop. And in that for each loop, you say you want the style to be displayed to none. And here you can see that for an element in pure JavaScript, to change the CSS, you use the style property, and you use pretty much the properties of CSS directly behind it. So you can display, you can say background color, etc. You would have background color would be all attached. In jQuery, you can traverse the tree by using functions like next, prev, or parent to go next to the next element, prev to go to the previous one, and parent to go to the parent of that element. In pure JavaScript, you do a query selector of the element, and then you can say next element sibling, previous element sibling, or parent element. That's pretty similar. It's not difficult to learn. Working with the DOM, the DOM is the programming interface that represents the document. So what you can do in jQuery to create a layer, for example, a div, you just say $, and then you give the div, and that creates the div. You can add text to it, a text function, and then you just put your text into it. In pure JavaScript, it's a little more involved, but it's still pretty readable. You create your element, your layer, the div. You create a text node with your text in it, and then you append that text node to your first element. There's a way of manipulating classes in jQuery that's very convenient. You can add classes to an element, you can remove classes, you can toggle class. The toggle will, if the element has a class active, it will remove it, and if it doesn't have it, it will add it. That's the toggle. If it has a class, you can do a testing like that, and it's very convenient. In pure JavaScript these days is also pretty easy, and you just select your element and you use the class list attribute. The class list, you can add to it a class, remove a class, toggle classes, and you can also test if a class is included for that element with the contains. Working with events, very simple in jQuery. For example, if you have a button and you can add the event click or on click, and you can add your code inside to see what's going to happen when you click on the button. You can also trigger events from the code with the trigger function. In pure JavaScript, it's not that difficult. It's just you get your element, you add an event listener list, click, and then you can also trigger events with just the dispatch event function. Ajax, it's also simple to do with jQuery. That's why a lot of people use jQuery for that. You just use the function ajax, you call your URL that is going to get the data. These days in pure JavaScript, it's very convenient. You can do a fetch. The fetch will get the data from the URL, data.json, for example, here. Then you do a then to set what you're going to do with the data, or you can catch errors that happen in that case. So the pure JavaScript version is now as easy to use as jQuery. I'm going to show you a little examples to see the difference between the code that's been made for jQuery and code that is going to be made for pure JavaScript. So here I have, I hope that you can see it. I do have a form that's been created to do a little to-do list. So here you have the form result on the right side. We have a label, we have an input field, a text, and we have a submit button to add an item. We do have a URL element that is going to be our list. It's going to collect all the items of the list. And we need to call jQuery, the library, to make this work. And a little library that we create ourselves, the code that we'll be creating to make this form work. Right now, what does the form do? You enter an item. You keep going. You can keep going like that. I'm just gonna. Don't worry about it. And what we want to do is when we have the mouse over an element, we have a little star on the right side that tells that we're on it. When we click on one element, it puts a little cross, meaning that that element is ready for deletion. And we click it the second time, it removes it. What do we do in jQuery to do that? It's simple. We have the constant to-do list, which actually is going to select our URL that's going to have all elements in it. We create a variable also that will get our form, and an element that's going to take our news item text field. In jQuery, it's very easy. You take your form and you add a submit event. You do event prevent default to avoid the form to be actually leaving the page. When you do a click on an element in a form, it reloads the page or go to another page. So we want to prevent that. We want to stay on the page. We use the value of the field, and if that value is different than nothing, we append an li element to our to-do list. After we append that element, we empty the value of the text field and we give it focus. So that's what's happening here. Then we can have a click event on the list itself for the elements here. And the first time we go to it, we give it a class done. And if the second time we go to it, we click on it, we fade it out and we remove it. So there's a little bit of CSS, sorry, for that. We do for the little star and little cross, we got a little extra CSS, but I mean, it's nothing involved here. So you can see that's pretty easy to create a little form that works pretty well. But how can we do that with pure JavaScript? So here I created the same HTML form, but this time I didn't add the jQuery library. We won't need it. Everything is going to work natively into the browser. I will add, since there's no show or hide function in JavaScript, we are going to use the CSS to do that. So when we do a show, we put the opacity of the element to 1, and we give it a transition so that it shows slowly. Same thing with hide. When we put an opacity of 0 and we transition to it slowly. I going to put the jQuery code next to the pure JavaScript code so you can see the difference. So here, I'm not going to type because it can take a long time. So I'm just going to copy paste elements. So here you have pretty much the same structure. We have a variable to-do list that we get the selector, that we get the element of the UL, which represent the list. We have a form. We do a document query selector of the form, and we get the field, the text field, by doing query selector of the name of the field. So now you can see we are in the list that does pure JavaScript. Okay. Then we add a submit event button. So we do, for the form, we add an event listener submit. We give it a function. In that function, we say, okay, we get the text field value. If that field value is not empty, then we're going to create an li element. There are different ways to do it, but the fastest way is to use the inner HTML function. We give it a text. The field value is nothing, and we give it focus. Once again, we prevent the default event. So let's see what does it do. So we have our element. We add an item, and I messed up somewhere, which I don't see why. Well, I'm not gonna. Of course, this is the demo. The demo effect, something that works one time before doesn't work afterwards. Anyway, I'm going to continue with the JavaScript. Then we're going to have the click element, the click event that we need to add. It's also something pretty similar. You have a to-do list and you add an event listener click. We added the event listener to the to-do list, so we need to set on which element is going to be this is going to be happening. So we want to say, okay, if my target, if the element we click on is an li, and then we check if it contains the done class, and if it does contain it, we do a fade out of that element. And actually, I added a timeout to give it to remove it after we fade it, and then remove it afterwards. And then if there is no class on it, we do a class done. Once again, we prevent the default to avoid the form to reload the page. And here we have a fade out function that doesn't exist in JavaScript. Therefore, we're going to add a function. It's a little function that does simple things. It takes the element, takes the class list of that element, and add, for the fade out, it add the class hide, and it removes the class show. So you can see here, we do not mess with CSS. The CSS is actually only here. And therefore, if we want to change the behavior of the fade out, we can always do it just in the CSS section. We don't have to mess with anything else. Let's try again that form. See if it works. Okay. Okay, so we inspect, use, whenever you do some JavaScript, it's very convenient to use the inspector of the browser. Here I'm using Firefox, but you can do it pretty much the same way with Chrome and Edge actually too. So we add an element. I don't know if it's going to correct this. No, this time we have it working. So we add our elements. We go over them. We click on them. Pretty much the same way we used to do it with jQuery. I didn't have to load that big chunk of code that's added with the jQuery library. So it's pretty. I mean, if you have some code that's still as simple as that, it really makes no sense to use jQuery here. So these days we can do a lot natively. The browser war is mostly over, and vendors are following standards. Now you can create amazing interactions with just a few lines of code. So HTML5 added transitions and animations that are hardware accelerated. CSS is with animations is super fast on mobile devices, and it actually uses less battery. JavaScript now is mature, and there is that to offer until then. The bottom line, though, is that you need to ensure that no one will be blocked by using another browser if they don't get all interactions that are meant for the new technology. You have plenty of tools that can help you along the way. There's a site I like a lot. It's called Can I Use? And this website can take any keyword and tell you what the browser support is. If I want to show you an example. So here, for example, I tried to see what first child support is for browsers, and it tells me all the green is tells me all this okay, and the red where it doesn't work. So pretty much the first child selector in CSS actually is not used in Internet Explorer 6. And then at the bottom, they tell you, sometimes they tell you little details about what will work or what will not work if there's no full support. Another site that I use a lot is Babble. Babble is a JavaScript compiler. It allows you to write with the latest features of JavaScript, and it compiles it for all the browsers. So you write the code you want, the way you intend to, but then when going to production, you use the compiled version to ensure that your code works for most browsers. So that way, it's an extra step, but that way you are not tied up to old technology, and you can write your code for new technology, and then you have more fun with it, and let Babel reconvert your code into older code. There's another site that's very convenient. It's polyfill.io. For those who don't know, polyfill it's like a fallback method that fills in a JavaScript feature that is missing in other browsers, and it replicates the same functionality that newer browsers provide natively. So here you have a list of all the functions that have been used in the latest JavaScript code, JavaScript syntax, and you can select objects or functions that you use in your code, and you want to make sure that's going to be available for all the browsers. Once you have made your selection, you can just copy the link to your site. Yes, it's an extra link, but the code is very minimum. It really does work on only the functionality you want. And you have also a version that has most common features, most common functions. So this is very useful. So it takes us back to the beginning of this presentation. So should you get rid of jQuery? If your Joomla template uses Bootstrap, you pretty much need to use jQuery. In Bootstrap 2, 3, and 4, jQuery is used for the call of models and for tooltips and a few things like that. So you pretty much have jQuery for sure. If you are using complex interactions like sliders, by no means use jQuery. It's going to make your life much easier. If you stick on jQuery library that you like, keep using it. Why not? But if you have just a few lines of code, just do not hesitate and modify your code to use pure JavaScript. Your website will gain in speed. You may not be able to remove the jQuery library depending on what other features you use. Joomla 4 is slowly removing jQuery. We may end up with a platform that's actually not using jQuery anymore. Especially when Bootstrap 5 come along, it will not require jQuery at all. So once your template is using Bootstrap, it will be much easier for you to just remove jQuery. And maybe for one last thing, I want to add, there are people who think jQuery is dead, but no, I don't think it is. jQuery is very popular in that it has a large community and a pool of plugins that everybody uses. It still ensures that you can write code for all browsers. You don't have to think about compatibility. It requires less code to write. When you go to pure JavaScript, you can see that you have longer function names and stuff like that. Even though you're not, at the end, you're going to end up with less code. It's maybe a little more challenging for you to use pure JavaScript because it's a little more verbose. And actually, if you see the tendency these days, you can see that jQuery has not been declining in usage all over the web. It's been going on and on and on. People still use it and keep using it. That's the tendency of what's going on now. And but even though jQuery is not dead, going to pure JavaScript. That's it for my talk, and thank you very much. Any question?
We do have one question from the chat, and that is, if someone is new to programming languages, do you think they should start with JavaScript or with jQuery? And this is particularly with Joomla 4 development in mind.
I would go with pure JavaScript, just because you will learn how jQuery works in the backend, and you will not make mistakes that a lot of people use. It's easy to do looping in jQuery and have code that keeps going on and scans a whole page, and it gets very slow. So if you know pure JavaScript, you know what's going on behind the scenes, and you have an idea of why your code is getting slow.
How about
go with pure JavaScript first?
How about using ES5 or ES 2015?
A little disconcerting is the way they rename the ECMAScript. For example, you have ECMAScript 2015, ES 2015, which is actually ES6. So, and ES5, so therefore is the previous version. You should definitely go with ES6 or ES 2015. Browser compatibility has been much improved. You may have a few compatibility issues with Edge in the previous versions, in the first versions that came out, or with Internet Explorer 11. But then, in that case, you just use polyfills or use a website like Babble to transfer your code.
Cool. Well, thank you so much indeed, Olivier. That was really, really awesome.
No, thank you very much.
And thanks to you guys that attended. We are just over the morning session of the Joomla Shack conference on the second day. We're going to take an hour break now, and then we're going to have 6 more sessions later today. Thank you so much for joining us in this session, and I hope you can join us at another session later today or tomorrow, where we have another full day on Friday. Thanks, everyone.